مرحبا بكم, welcome back, مرة تاني. I'm Roland Smith, and today I'd like to talk to you about how to use a root-based dictionary like this one. 2 segments ago I had talked about learning how to use a root-based dictionary, and 1 segment ago I talked about a book and read a poem from it. We're going to combine both of these elements in today's lesson. We are also going to scratch the surface on how we can use the i'rab to move order of emphasis in the Arabic sentence without compromising the Arabic syntax. That means without getting it wrong. Let me let you in on a little secret. Now that we're done with al-kitab, let me get alhamdulillah. Here's the secret. Word order is still important, but that's why there's a case ending system. Sababan, you have extended flexibility with word order that you previously have not known about, and there's a limit to it, but we're going to learn that limit. Now that we've identified what we're going to do today, let's get started. Root-based dictionary. If you haven't color-coded the letters in your dictionary, or didn't know what I meant or how I did it, I'm going to show you real quick again. On my book, I chose to put these little color-coded stickies at the beginning of each new Arabic letter, alphabetically. I use a different color for each letter. And the reason why I do this is so that I can get through this 1,302-page book quickly, because naturally there are a lot of pages. I'd like to also give you another tip. If color-coding stickies isn't your cup of tea, and you're more of a computer whiz, that's fine. I am too, actually. And the other thing that I like to do, which I want you to try to do, is copies of the Hans Veer Modern Standard Arabic Dictionary prior to 1975 have expired copyrights. Because of this, this entire dictionary is available for PDF download totally legally. The only thing that you're going to be missing from, let's see, a 2001 copy are little amendments to Arabic vocabulary, such as disk drive or proxy server. Other than that, it's the same stuff. Now, think back to 204. Do you remember from Al-Kitab when you had those tedious exercises of extracting the root from a word? Well, let's do it again. Remember ya, waw, and aleph are wild cards. There are some rules to what these vowels will be or not be in the active perfectum. That's another way of saying al-madi, the 3-lettered past tense. Don't worry, I don't want you to recite the derivations on these vowels, because I know that you can extract the root and get it right on your first or second try by now. Now that I've jogged your memory, we've color-coded tabs alphabetically. Let's start with this word that I want you to look up. Shahada. 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 Okay, great. That was a trick question. You aren't going to find shahada listed as such. You find it in the active perfectum between or actually, rather, on the top of page 571, top left-hand corner. And let me explain this entry, shahada, to witness, or to see, in a sense. Let me explain this entry up to where you see Roman numeral 3. This is the acceptable and most widely used order that a root-based dictionary will go through, defining a word at its root and then moving forward from that. Take a mental snapshot where you see tiny letters and where you start seeing bold Roman numerals. Do you notice how there's a lot of verbiage before you get to Roman numeral 3? I'll explain that in a second. Before I explain it, I'd like to just make a little notation here, a big, important one. This book does a lot of assuming, okay? It assumes you have extensive knowledge of the Arabic verb form chart. To benefit from what's in this book, you really do. If you don't have extensive knowledge, it's okay. One of the things that make me different than a lot of other people who are studying Arabic or have studied it for a long time is this. You guys should have started using your verb form charts in Aleph Ba. That's how important your verb form chart is. Okay? Now, if you haven't, it's okay. I didn't either. The way you can get over this little learning curve is you need to find an Arabic verb form chart. The back of Al-Kitab 2, 2nd edition, the chapter before the glossary starts, has an Arabic verb form chart. Personally, I don't care for that one. What I'd like you to do when you have a second is go to Google, look up Awzan al-Fa'al, and find a good Arabic verb form chart. And by good, I mean one that's in Arabic. It is furthermore assumed that all that, the verbiage you see before you start seeing the Roman numerals, that's basically forms 1 and 2 in a nutshell for you. It's assumed that you know forms 1 and 2 very well, and why the hen you don't need them emboldened for you. It's just the format of this book. Consequently, the first part of a verb listing in a Hansveer, if it does not immediately begin with a Roman numeral 3, is as follows. It explains the usage of a verb as it pertains to forms 1 and 2, and with the notation, it's assumed you can differentiate the transitivity of your chosen usage. In simpler words, this part of the entry demonstrates the situations in which the verb can be used, and secondarily, if there is a preposition that can modify the verb in form 1 and 2, you will see it here. Once the bold Roman numeral print starts, you will see the situations which predicate a verb according to the form that it's in a consecutive order. So you would have form 3 followed by its usages plus prepositions, then form 4, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Following the end of the Roman numerals, this is an important part, beginning with the first indentation. If you find a verb and you look up the 3-letter roots, okay, underneath the first entry, the first indentation, you will start to see nouns and adjectives stemming from that root, which, however, only have one thing in common. They are expressive of a less related concept. Once these finish, you will find the noun that is directly related to the root, and its uses and situations predicating said use therein. Just to let you know, this is pretty easy to figure out, but if I miss anything, I don't want to make this any more harder than it needs to be. The Hansveer is a great source, a reliable source for plurals. Google Translate is a good source for plurals with the understanding that it's going to give you a very extremely limited usage of that plural with absolutely no context to ground it in. So if you want to know a plural and get it right, go to your Hansveer. Plurals are demarcated with the abbreviation PL, followed by either a dash AT, which what the hen stands for, Aleph Ta, or the full word in its plural form, bil-Arabi. You will also find the maf'ul and fa'il forms of the verb if there are any. Naturally, some words that are not of Arabic origin, and other words where it's just obvious, that there will not be a maf'ul or a fa'il form. You won't find them, okay? What I'd like to just say is that this is not a, touchdown strategy. This is essentially a summary of how this book works. The other thing I'd like to add is the process of getting these different derivations on, nouns that don't have the original meaning as its root. Nouns that do have the original meaning of its root. All those rules do not suffer the cause of learning them in this instant. Okay, you will learn them over time, inshallah. Okay, I have faith that you will. It just comes over time. The important part is that by starting to really familiarize yourself with your verb form chart and using this book, you'll be able to develop your vocabulary synthetically. I talked about the synthetic development of vocabulary briefly in my last lesson, but if you're able to understand the changes in transitivity when a verb form changes from 1 to 2, the changes in the reception of the action of the verb as it progresses, and the transitivity related to that change, you'll be, pretty soon you'll be listening to the news. You'll say, hey, I know that word. You'll say, oh my goodness, wait a second. That verb is in form 3. I know that that means X. Okay? It comes over time. But most of these words that you hear in the news are ones that, seem unfamiliar to you. You actually do know. Although I like Al-Kitab's series to a limited extent, it does provide you with a lot of good vocabulary. It doesn't provide you with that vocabulary in the verb form chart because I guess whoever wrote that book hoped that somebody would really get into verb forms later with you. That's something I would like to do. Now that I've given you this extremely abridged tutorial on the root-based dictionary, I give you my vote of confidence in terms of you wanting to use it a little bit more than you previously have. If I go on any further with root-based dictionaries, you'd probably fall asleep, and that's okay. Sometimes I fall asleep when people are talking to me. This stuff's pretty dry. It's not all ice cream and lollipops. My goal is to give you a tool and whet your appetite to use it. The more you do it, the better you get, the sharper your tool will be. Let's move on to the poem I read in the previous segment. If you don't remember, great, because we're only going to deal with one line here. Let me talk about how we can use the case-ending system, specifically using Dama, to move the subject and ground it at the end of a sentence, or toward the end of the sentence, in order to appeal to specificity in questions. That's a tough one. Demonstrate an alternative Yarab pattern. Understand a style in poetry. Help you develop your own writing with style. And help you make a giant leap in your reading comprehension level. This will help you this will help you in an exam to qualify you as a translator and assign a level to you in which you are competent. Okay, reading is a big part of that. If you know your verb form chart, you've seen written forms of poetry, you know alternative sentence constructions, you won't be spending 50% of your allotted exam time looking stuff up in whatever dictionary they allow you to have, if they allow you to have one. Now, let me just, let me preface all of this, what we're about to do, with one thing. I'd like to warn you also, and not in a George Bush kind of way, but I'm telling you, if you can't develop your own style, knock on wood, which starts today, which starts by imitating the style of other authors, you're going to be stuck writing boring expository jargon. Okay? So, let's refresh. What do we know about Dama? It's marfu'. It occurs at the beginning of the sentence, usually. And it's directly connected with the subject of the sentence, always. What do we know about what we already know? Here's a very good standard Fusha sentence. يفضل الولد أن يشاهد الأخبار الصباح. Let me read that with the Arab. يفضل الولد أن يشاهد الأخبار الصباح. Verb first, Dama on the verb, followed by the subject. Dama on it because it's definite, followed by en, followed by another verb. It's mansub. Why? Because of in. Fatha on yushahada. Because it's mansub. If you want to be super fusha, put the Dama on the first letter of that mansub verb. And I know that if it's going to confuse you. If it's not going to confuse you, just strike what I just said. And let's put a fatha on akhbara, al-akhbara, because it's definite, as well as the direct object. And then tanween fatha on sabahan. Good, we've hit all of our bases. Remember how I said we're just going to worry about Dama? Well, the previous exercise I gave you just to jog your memory, and fusha syntax and expository writing, al-kitab style. Before we get into the hard stuff, let's make an exercise out of the previous sentence. يَفْتَلُ الْوَلِدُ أَنْ يُشَاهِدَ الْأَخْبَارَ الصَّبَاحِ. When you heard this sentence, what would naturally be the first thing you remember about this sentence? The last thing you heard. You know, it's not totally unnatural or unheard of. You know, for example, you may be sitting in class, the teacher's going on, blah, 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 this person did that person did that, and this is why, okay? The last thing you heard was probably the last thing they said. That's how human beings listen. Information in the beginning and at the end typically has the most emphasis. The last thing you heard from the sentence I just gave you was sabahan. And, you know, meaning that the boy prefers to watch the news in the morning. Morning italicized. That's really how the emphasis is occurring in this sentence. This would be an appropriate answer if we were playing Jeopardy to the question, when does the boy watch TV? Okay? Now, what if your interlocutor asks you, who does what between the hours 4 and 11:59 a.m.? In this case, al-walid and yafdal can switch places. Al-walidu yafdalu an yushahada al-akhbara sabahan. So, think about how the information is ordered in this sentence. Let's not put it back into English, it'll be a waste of time. But you get the picture, and I hope you see the direction I'm going. Let's do another one. What if your interlocutor asked you, which person prefers to do what in the morning? This calls for specificity. And I'm telling you, this is specificity in the most articulate of ways. This isn't using hada or hadahi. This isn't putting hada at the end, or hadahi at the end, or di or da at the end. This is really nitty-gritty. Pay attention here, because this is how you will answer questions correctly, appeal to the person and the specificity of the question being asked of you. Okay, this is important stuff. This will make you appealing as far as somebody who's qualified to speak Arabic. Let's ask yourself a couple of questions. Did the boy still perform the actions related to the verbs? Yes. Then the boy is still the subject, gets a Dama. Let's think about this construction and what it indicates. Now that al-walid and sabahan are now closer together toward the end of the sentence, changing the emphasis on the subject, it puts the critical information at the end of the sentence. At the end of the sentence being the latest information you recollect. In a jumla fa'aliyya, the acceptable construction has a subject which will fall immediately after either the marfu' or mansub verb, followed by the direct object, if there is one. وَالْأَدَنِ الَّذِي حَضَرَاتَكُمْ مِنْ قَبْلِ. I'm just seeing if you still are paying attention. Let's consider the first line of the poem I read. يا ساعة نتابها النظام. يا ساعة نتابها النظام. With Dama on al-Nazamu, This grammatically correct sentence is telling us three things. Al-Nizam, or Al-Nizamu, however you want to pronounce it, is the subject. It is definite, and it is at the end of the sentence. Now put that on the back burner. In order to understand what the subject is doing and how we got to the point, or the process related in making Dama and making Al-Nizamu the subject, let's consider what's left. Ya sa'atin atabaha. Now what do you see? What do you notice about sa'a or sa'atin? Ladiha kasrin. Okay, things that have kasrin are majroor or magrur. Hardly anybody ever says that. What do we know about things that are genitive or majroor? Well, prepositions and idafa. But things that are majroor, majroor has a more expanded meaning. Prepositions and idafa is what you learned in Al-Kitab. In written Arabic, majroor has a little bit of a broader meaning. Not too much broader, but I'll get into what I mean in a second. So you don't see a preposition? No. If it's not a preposition, isn't it an idafa? No. If you thought that, you're not a bad person. I thought that, actually, until I read this thing about 100 times. A lot of people do that, and what they get confused is the particle of address with what they get confused is the particle of address, sa'atan, and then atabaha. Sa'atan is actually with the particle of address. Sa'atan is not with atabaha. And you're probably saying, wait, before I told you that, you might have been thinking, because you're good students, it can't be kasreen. In fact, it can't be tanween anything, because you can't have tanween anything before the definite noun and an idafa. That's the point. You just answered your own question. Good job. This is not an idafa. Okay, so why kasreen? Hang on, I'll get to it. Call back into your mind the particle of address, ya. Then sa', which is indefinite. Think about this. What do you know so far? It's not mansub. It's not marfu'a. What's left? It's probably majroor, but you can't bank on that just yet. I'm going to cover another reason why it's majroor, or why yani ladeha kasrin. And then once we break this down into English, okay, and then I'll go into why breaking it down into English isn't good all the time. It's good for the purposes of this lesson. What do we know? What do we know about mansub? And how do we figure out what's mansub? I know I just said, it's not mansub and it's not marfu', but let's really get into why or why not a part of the sentence is mansub. In fact, I got a better idea. I'm going to gently remind you all how to find the mansub part of the sentence without knowing anything about the i'rab. Okay? First, let's spell itab. Take off the ha alif, possessive suffix. Find alif, hamza, fatha, ta, sukun, ain, fatha, ba, fatha. Okay? In your root-based dictionary. And go. It's on page 114. The entry that you see, itab, which may be spelt a little bit different, that would be the gerund form. This is the noun. It's still a noun. Okay? Find this word in there. The entry, the first 5 words or first 5 expressions following the entry alif, ta, ain, ba. Toiling, tiredness, exertion, drudgery, burden, nuisance. So pick the right usage from the words you see. And since you don't understand the sentence, you might have to think about this in English for a minute. Now, go through these words. I mean, honestly, I just picked the first 5 off the top and apply the process I'm about to give you. If there's substantially more, repeat this process until desired result has been affected. Now, ask yourself, can an hour be toiling? No, not really. Can a clock be tiredness? No. Can a clock exert itself? No. It could, potentially bend the hook it's hanging on, but that's not it. Could a clock or sa'a, or maybe even a more general sense, time, could time be drudgery? I don't know. Did it say something offensive to you? No. So, is it talking bad? No. So, what about burden? Can a clock be a burden? Yeah, metaphorically speaking, it could. Could an hour be a burden? And I like nuisance better. Time can be a nuisance. The hour can be a nuisance. If we use nuisance, this whole thing can make sense. Let me show you how. Look at the short vowels on itabaha. The last short vowel before the possessive suffix tells you it's mansub. Why? Because the yarab shifts to accommodate possessive suffixes where the yarab has been suppressed via. Let's say the usage was not this way. I just want you to create a sentence. I want you to translate the sentence in English back to Arabic. The sentence I want you to translate into Arabic for me right now, using the words that are in front of you. Her nuisance is the system, period. How would you say it? Don't even write it down. You can write it down after this. Itabuha al-nazamu. Did you hear that? Itabuha al-nazamu. Itabuha al-nazamu. Okay? It's actually, it should get one of those little curly cues on the aleph. Now, back to our Dama. Actually, no, let me back up. Do you hear the difference between the way we just said Atabuha al-nazamu and Atabaha al-nazamu? Okay, there was the Dama. Where was the Dama when we just wanted to say her nuisance is the system? The Dama, where was it? Atabuha al-nazamu. It's very subtle. It's on the ba. Okay, it's on the ba. Now, from the poetry we read, what or where is there a fatha? It's over the ba. That fatha is there because it's telling you that this word, this part of the sentence, is now no longer part of the subject. That's what mansub really means. It's a departure from the subject, okay? Now, back to our Dama, which falls on al-nazamu. That is the subject of the sentence. Dama is expressing the concept of is in this jumla ismiya. Let's say, for the sake of this exercise, only, ever, okay, that the concept of khabar for jumla ismiya and jumla fa'aliya are the same in as much as they describe what the mubtada does. What have we learned about construction in the previous exercise? In the jumla fa'aliya, after the subject is taken from the beginning and moved, and then put in the latter part of the sentence, it still must fall directly after the khabar, after n, and before the direct object. So in this case, the subject must fall directly after the predicate or the khabar. The mansub part, suffice it, let me take that part out. That's going to throw you for a loop. Let me repeat what I just said. So in this case, the subject must fall directly after the predicate or khabar, the mansub part. Okay? Because essentially, that is your verb. And the subject is going to get the Dama on al-nizam. Atabaha al-nizam. Ba. Ba has the feta. That's how we know it's mansub. So now that something's feta, or now that something's mansub, Dama, let's get to the majrur part. Let me give you a sentence in English that's going to ground this meaning in Arabic. Okay, and then I'm going to have you appreciate the sentence in Arabic and understand it in Arabic. You'll be able to do that in 1 second. Just hang on for another minute or two. Okay, the sentence is, hey, our, you, hey, our, its nuisance is the system. In other words, you get tired, or the nuisance of the thing you are addressing, which is the clock, comes from its system, in parentheses, of timekeeping with that. Okay, because that's what clocks do. The nuisance of the hour, at its nuisance, which is the system, comes from, go back to the beginning of the sentence. Now, let me tell you something else that kasrines can signify. Kasrines, for the purpose of this exercise, and maybe a couple more in the future. And until you really get the hang of what kasrines can mean, it can also mean from, up. It's genitive. Now we throw these words around here like genitive, nominative, blah, blah. Let me tell you really what genitive means. Genitive means generates. Genitive means of. So, the nuisance of the hour, which is the system, is of the hour. It's of the timekeeping system. But see, when I throw in of there, it gives you the thinking to get this sentence's meaning in Arabic. But there's no of here. Because if we said of, it would mean that we'd have to stick is in, okay? And once we stick is in, it means whatever after is the subject. The point I'm trying to make, okay, is that the is that we've stuck in is on al-nizam. Let me read this back again. The nuisance, or its nuisance, parentheses, from the hour, okay, its nuisance tabaha, which is the system, Dama, comes from of, hello, comes from sa, kasrin. Can I get alhamdulillah? Let's stop here. We'll do more exercises from the poem so that you can get comfortable with using the Dama to ground the subject in a part of the sentence that is not in the beginning. Do you see why translating this line in English is kind of a moot point? I mean, I'm thrilled I found a way to explain it to you. You're probably thrilled you just made a giant leap in your reading comprehension. Now have an expanded understanding of what kasrin can indicate. And you're probably thrilled that you know how to move the subject to a later part of a sentence, in a jumla fa'aliya and a jumla ismiya. And you should also be glad you have a new tool to put in your toolbox that you didn't get from Al-Kitab. The truth is, there's a lot in Arabic which only can be appreciated in Arabic, like this sentence. Given this little lesson, you have a new tool in your toolbox. Use this tool for reading and mostly writing with your own style. Mull over this sentence. Now try to understand it in Arabic. Don't do it right now. I mean, if you can, great. Do it when you get home. Read it over, and read it over, and read it over. Just to make sure you don't forget where you put your new tool, here's your homework. I want you to try to make a sentence like this one. Make a couple if you have the time. And imitate the style of this author. By imitating the style, I mean I want you to replace each word of the sentence. There's only 4 words, okay? And replace each one as is appropriate. If you can make a great sentence that makes sense, great. If you can't, we're going to try harder together. If you make a silly one, great. I want you to understand this construction of the sentence being at the end and the alternative indication of this kasrin here. Because what I can tell you is that in literature and poetry, this kasrin and the dama at the end, this construction, is used quite frequently and can sometimes be very confusing if you're not ready for it. Just follow the example to the letter, to the T, to the diacritical. You feel me? Okay. You have to try, or just be happy expressing yourself with al-kitab faqat. Can I get a alhamdulillah? Sah? Okay, we're going to end this lesson here. Shukran alaykum. Thank you for listening to me. Wa hashufak lama hashufak. Ma salama.